to this a terrific panel of people, and I can't think of a better set of people to reflect on this a very important question. As you know, the event is called Indian Agriculture After the Revolt. So clearly the backdrop, the context to this discussion is that, in 2020, the government introduced 3 farm laws aimed at, providing more choice to farmers, giving them more freedom of contracting, reducing the government's role in the Essential Commodities Act. That was enacted, and about more than a year later, after protests and revolt, those 3 laws had to be withdrawn by the government late last year. So that is the background to this discussion. I think it's fair to say that the clamor when the laws were passed, both for and against, in some ways were no less strong when the laws were repealed as well, or rather the clamor when it was repealed was no less strong on both sides than when the laws were enacted. And in part, of course, it's due to all that happened in between. But today we're going to try and not look back, but use that as an opportunity where we are to look ahead to what kinds of changes we think we need to see Indian agriculture, if at all. And for me, a small personal aside is that, I used to work for the Indian government, and a lot of my research focused on, exports, trade, manufacturing, services, but it was a sobering education for me to realize how central agriculture has been, is, and should be to any discussion about Indian economic development. So today, to help us answer that, we have 6 panelists, and I'm going to introduce them in the kind of sequence in which we're going to have this discussion. We're going to begin with about 20-minute presentation by Professor Shoumitro Chatterjee of Pennsylvania State University. This is in the Daniel Patrick Moynihan spirit of we're all entitled to our opinions, but we're not entitled to our facts. And so Shoumitro is going to lay down, some, obviously it's not going to be comprehensive, all the facts that everyone would want to know, but I think some really important and key facts which should inform any intelligent discussion about agriculture going forward. That will be followed by a panel which I will moderate, and the panel will have 4 really outstanding, eminent people. Yogendra Yadav, who's president of the Swaraj party, if I may say so. He's a kind of lapsed psephologist and political scientist turned courageous activist and politician, and really a voice of a voice of conscience on many issues across the spectrum in India, but also has been very involved in the activism around the pushback against the farm laws. Then we have Professor Mekhala Krishnamurthy, senior fellow at CPR and associate professor at Ashok University. Just written some lots of very thoughtful things, not just on agriculture, but on women's issues, on many other things. She, along with Shoumitro, Devesh Kapoor, and Marshall Bouton, is an author of a very important report on Indian agriculture, no doubt, from which she will draw upon. And Mekhala, we're really delighted that you could be on the panel. Then we have Harish Damodaran, who's a journalist with the Indian Express, visiting at the Center for Policy Research. I say with all honesty and sincerity that when I used to be in government, I used to read everything and anything that Harish wrote on agriculture. I would read, and I would still continue to do so. He's so grounded in what is really happening that it's just such a pleasure to read everything he writes. He's also written 2 books on the history of Indian entrepreneurship, which everyone should read. Then, of course, we have Professor Ashok Gulati, in some ways India's preeminent agricultural economist for several decades, steadfastly arguing the case for agriculture with the aim of improving efficiency, doing things right in agriculture, and he's been such a tremendous voice, a thoughtful analyst of Indian agriculture. For all of us, he is the first person to go to when we talk about all these things. After I finish the discussion, we'll have Professor Andrew Foster of Brown University, who will provide some concluding remarks. Andrew, of course, has done some amazing academic research on agriculture in India, Bangladesh, South Asia more generally, including a very, very recent piece in the Journal of Political Economy on the relationship between farm size and productivity in agriculture. So let me stop there and immediately turn to Shoumitro for his presentation of the basic facts we need to know about agriculture. Over to you, Shoumitro.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure and an honor to be doing this presentation. Before I begin, I just want to say one thing, that acknowledgements and thanks are due to an excellent undergraduate at Brown, Pradyut, who worked with me analyzing and putting together some of the data that I'm going to present today. So the first point I want to make is that the presence of this MSP procurement system that has been argued ad infinitum during policy discussions, the point is its mere presence does not imply that farmers, and especially small farmers, would benefit from it. And to understand that, let's first understand what this system is trying to do. We are basically trying to push up farm revenues, either by procuring more, which is we are pushing up quantities, or by procuring at higher prices, which is procuring at a higher MSP. So first I'm going to talk about Qs, which is the quantity, and then I'm going to turn over to the price part. And the statement that I want to make is that in the aggregate data, if you see that a state procures a large fraction of its production, that does not automatically imply that a large fraction of the farmers of the state benefit from this program. Small farmers especially, there are many, many ways in which they can get excluded from the system. And one of the easiest ways to sort of see this is through this chart. This chart, which is plotting state by state fraction of its production that is sold to government agencies. This chart, or a version of this chart, should be familiar to everyone. So on the left-hand side, you have fraction of paddy production that is procured by government agencies. And from the aggregate data, you see that there's a lot of intense procurement happening in Punjab and Haryana, but very little in the eastern states. And as scholars like Sudha Narayanan and Ritika Khera have pointed out, there are new states that have ramped up procurement. So you have Chhattisgarh and MP for wheat. But then you see a challenge, right? And this is something that Dr. Ashok Gulati has pointed us to, which is that if you look at the same data from farmer surveys, you see numbers that are much, much smaller, often less than half of what the FCI reports. And the question is, why does the FCI, which is the aggregate data, and the farmer survey data differ so much? The second point that I want to draw your attention to is that if you notice a number that is similar in two states, so let's pick Haryana and Odisha, the farmer survey data tells us that about 10 to 15% of the production in both states get procured by government agencies. Do they mean the same thing as far as farmer welfare is concerned? And the answer is going to be no, because the answer is going to depend on the mechanism of procurement. So I feel that there are many basic facts about the MSP procurement program that are well known by now, including the biases in procurement. But perhaps what I feel is less well understood is the huge differences in the mechanisms of procurement across different states. And this, to a large extent, determines how much would farmers benefit from these programs, and also how farmers would react to proposed changes and reforms. So institutions, state capacities, and mechanisms all are going to matter a great deal. To illustrate this, let me give you like two specific examples. Let's start with Punjab, which is a system that all of us have read a lot about and understand well. In Punjab, government procurement of paddy or wheat occurs or is done through artiyas, who are these commission agents. So their farmers usually sell to artiyas. Artiyas in turn would sell to FCI or government agencies. The payment happens the other way around. So FCI would pay the artiyas. Now they are also trying to do DBT. The artiyas would get a certain commission of the total trade volume, and then the farmers are paid by the artiyas. Now, because here artiyas keep a fixed commission of how much they procure from farmers, they have absolutely no incentive to exclude any farmer, right? Because even if the crop did not meet procurement standards, if artiyas were to leave that part out, they would lose on their commission. And so they would not exclude any farmer in Punjab. If you turn to Odisha, on the other hand, things are very different. Here, procurement occurs at these regulated marketing committees, which are manned by government officials. Now, these government officials are not getting a commission, they are getting government salaries. These officials apply deductions which are due to quality gradients, so things like moisture, dust, and so on. Because of the bureaucracy, also maybe because of corruption, many times there are delays in procurement. So in our fieldwork, we noticed that often procurement would begin by up to a month after harvest has taken place. And that essentially means that smaller farmers who might be cash trapped would be forced to sell at much lower prices to either intermediaries or larger farmers. Even when procurement begins, they find ways to give larger farmers the first preference to sell. And all of this essentially results in an exclusion of small farmers. In fact, in Bihar, what we saw that packs were, so in Bihar, the government procurement happens at packs, and they put out these lists, and in these lists they specify the order in which farmers would come and sell their grains, and there the lists invariably had the names of the larger farmers first, followed by the smaller farmers. On top of that, these states tend to have like quotas on how much the state would be buying. Of course, if you give larger farmers the first preference, the quota gets quickly filled by the larger farmers and the smaller farmers get left out. Now, then there is roundabout sales. So the smaller farmers, before procurement began, had to sell in distress to either larger farmers or intermediaries, who then end up selling to the government, which means that in the FCI aggregate data, you notice that a large fraction of the crop is being procured by the state. But when you ask farmers, were you able to access the government procurement agency? The answer is no. And that is what I meant when I said government procurement does not automatically imply larger coverage. And sort of an easy way to see that there is a version of this that is in the paper by sort of Ritika Khera and Sudha Narayanan, but the easiest way to see that in many states the smaller farmers are getting excluded is by looking at the land holding size or the cropped area of farmers who primarily sell to government agencies versus the land area of farmers or the gross crop area of farmers who are primarily making sales in the open market, and you can clearly see that there's a preference for larger farmers. So this was all about quantities. Let's talk about prices a little bit and how that results in exclusion. And for the moment, let's only focus at the price distribution of farmers who are making sales to government procurement agencies. In Punjab and Haryana, as all of us know, these prices hover very close to the minimum support price. But in all these eastern states, even those farmers who actually sell to government agencies get a price that is about 6 to 7% lower than the MSP. And so in states like Bihar, there's already a double whammy, right? First, my likelihood of accessing government procurement agencies is low. And second, even when I sell to government agencies, I don't get the full MSP. And this also feeds into market prices, the open market prices. So in Punjab and Haryana, it doesn't really matter who's buying your produce, because ultimately everything will end up in the granaries of the FCI, and the price transmission is good. So whether I sell to Artiyas, whether I sell to open markets, or whether I sell to the government agencies in Punjab and Haryana, you are very likely to get a price that is at least as much as the MSP. But in states like Bihar and West Bengal, if you're not selling to the government agencies, which is a large fraction of the farmers, you're getting a discount of up to 20-30%. Resulting in sort of exclusion. And so this is what I meant, that when you see that 10% number, how much is being procured by government agencies to be similar in Haryana and Odisha, they mean completely different things when it comes to evaluating welfare of farmers. The second thing we might be interested in are indirect effects. So if there is limited procurement, does it spill over to the prices of those who are selling in the open market? And I don't have a very good answer for this. Indirect effects could be strong. In the limited study that we did, that Arvind mentioned, we found that if one other farmer in my village had sold to a government procurement agency, my price, expected price, would go up by about 1% in Bihar and by nothing in sort of Odisha. So we found that these effects were weak, but of course this was not a randomized evaluation, so we can't say for sure, but this is sort of the evidence that we have. Now, another reason for having the MSP, which scholars like Roshan Kishore have pointed out, is to reduce the price volatility. So the price volatility of cereals tends to be lower than fruits and vegetables, and that's probably a good thing for farmers. The only thing I want to add to this is that we should recognize that the MSP does not address quantity shocks. So if half of my production was destroyed in a hailstorm, the MSP can't save me, right? Because if I don't have stuff to sell, I won't get any MSP, even if the systems were in place. And the second thing is that as we move towards market integration, both domestic market integration and international market integration, we should also recognize that this is in future going to increase income volatility. And that happens because in unintegrated markets, when you're not linked to global markets, local quantity shocks are counterbalanced by changes in prices. So if there is low production, you will see an increase in prices so that revenues are automatically sort of stabilized. When you have integrated markets, this negative correlation between the P and Q completely breaks down. So the P is completely pegged to the international prices, and quantity shocks will get passed on one for one to income. And these two things are something to be cognizant about, and something that the MSP program in itself may not be able to address. Putting all of this together, I want to make a third point, which is, I think, slightly subtle, and again, maybe not that well recognized, is that think about states like Bihar and West Bengal, where you don't have a good procurement system. You already have twin challenges of market prices falling too low and market prices being more volatile. But there's a third one, which is, and I'm not trying to make a statement about food security, which is a separate issue. I'm just looking at it from the point of view of farmers. In these states, because there is no procurement at home, you are importing grains from outside. If you're for the PDS, when you import grains from other states for PDS, artificially we are reducing home demand, which means for domestic farmers, market prices are going to be even lower. So the 20% gap that you saw in market prices between sort of Punjab and Bihar in the previous chart, some of it is also coming through this channel. The second thing I want to move to is on federalism, which is how are resources, especially resources of the center, getting distributed across states. And the first thing, obviously, is the output subsidy, which is the subsidy that comes on account of the minimum support price. Now, we should note that the subsidy is not the entire MSP. The subsidy is the MSP minus some opportunity cost of procuring this grain. There are many ways of doing it. The way we have done it is how sort of India submits its filings to the WTO, which is the MSP relative to an external reference price, an international price of the crop. And here, so the patterns are similar because the patterns kind of mimic how much quantity is getting procured from each state. But the numbers are staggering, right? So in a year, Punjab on an average is getting about 10,000 crores as compared to Bihar, which is not even getting 1/10 of that resource. The second thing to note here is that most of this subsidy is coming on account of rice. For wheat, the MSP is usually not that high as compared to the external reference price. In some cases, actually lower than the external reference price. And so that is something we should note here. The output subsidies is only a part of the transfer that the states get from the center as a part of the procurement program. Another tranche of the transfer comes from taxes and fees on procurement. So these are taxes like mandi taxes, administrative fee, rural development cess that the states levy on procurement that happens within their boundaries. Note that these taxes, we are not including logistical costs of labor, drying, bagging, and so on. These are pure taxes that the states levy should procurement happen within their boundaries. And again, as you might expect, kind of Punjab and Haryana get a lot of it, about 5,000 crores for Punjab, 2,000 crores for Haryana, and very little resource transfer to the other states. And here you might wonder how much of this is coming because Punjab and Haryana are just procuring a lot versus the unit taxes being different. And of course, the quantities are playing a role because Punjab is procuring a lot, but there are also differences in how much per quintal of grain taxes each state is charging. And in particular, it so happens that Punjab taxes procurement of a quintal of grain 2 to 3 times as much as the eastern states. And then, of course, the double whammy comes from procurement, right? So what this is showing is that not only are these taxes higher in some states, but also we are procuring more from states that charge higher taxes. And this you can do as a percent, the procurement you can do as total procurement. Here we are plotting on the x-axis the percentage of production that is being procured. It doesn't matter. You essentially get more procurement from states that are charging higher taxes. Now, if you put everything together just on the procurement side, which is the transfers on account of the subsidies plus the taxes, the numbers, the first time I saw it, these were just staggering. So in a year, the total transfer to Punjab is very close to 16,000 crores, as compared to almost nothing in the eastern states in West Bengal and Bihar and so on. And the inequity kind of magnifies once you account for how many rural households live in these states. So in Punjab, where the transfer per rural household is close to 4,500 rupees. It's close to nothing in sort of West Bengal and Bihar. The last thing I want to sort of talk about is an issue about environment. And I'm picking on one thing, but I want to make a bigger point here. And the point is this, that our discussion about agriculture has so far focused so much on the northwestern states that we now know very well that this paddy wheat kind of monocropping has led to big declines in groundwater and groundwater stress in Punjab and Haryana. But I feel what is less recognized is that this is happening almost everywhere in the country. So in Madhya Pradesh, which started procurement in 2008 of wheat, after that, we saw an alarming rise in the incidence of defunct wells and the need for deep tube wells, pointing to this groundwater stress. Wells are going defunct almost everywhere in the country, and a lot of it is associated with cultivation or over cultivation of rice. So just let me conclude in like 2 minutes and say that the three sort of big takeaways, for me at least, from this was that, one, to make the point that mere procurement is neither necessary nor sufficient if the objective is benefiting small farmers. Second, the way our systems are designed and the way resources are getting distributed, there's an implicit inequity built into it. And the third, both in terms of our ag policy and support, but also in sort of our recognition of particular issues, I feel that there has been a neglect of the East, and we are not incorporating their challenges well enough. So with that, I would like to stop and hand it over back to Arvind.
Shoumitro, that was absolutely superb in setting the stage for this discussion. Your three key takeaways were just spot on. Now, I want to, before turning to our eminent panelists, say that I want to cover kind of three maybe sets of issues, or maybe even a fourth one based on what Shoumitro just said. The first, I want to talk about, where we should be headed in terms of, the broader agricultural policy, MSP procurement, price deficiency payments, direct benefit transfers. I want to talk about that. Second, I do want to talk about something that I feel has been really neglected in India, which is the second set of issues that he raised about federalism and the inequity across states. But I want to lead that into a larger question, which is the following, which I think receives very little attention. If agriculture is indeed a state subject, how do we want, what role should state governments play? How much should they be accountable for agriculture? And why is the discussion so obsessed with what the center does and not enough with what the states do? And then I want to come to the whole environment question, and in particular, get your reactions to whether some kinds of subsidies which are critical in causing this environmental stress, how we need to deal with that as well. So first question, what is good about the panel is that they represent a range of views on what should be done in terms of the whole support for agriculture. On the one hand, we have, I think, Yogendra Yadav and Harish Damodaran, who think that the MSP should remain, maybe be extended to other crops, but should take the form not of government procurement, but maybe of price deficiency payments like we have in many parts of the world. We have, on the other hand, I think if I'm right, Mekhala, who thinks that there should be much more differentiation across states in terms of how we need to address the broader problem. And then we have Ashok Gulati, who's very much more in favor of maybe retaining some of the MSP, but then using direct benefit transfers for addressing agriculture. So Yogendra, let me begin with you. Have I summarized your position correctly? And if that is your position, can you talk through what some of the implications are, the costs, how this would be done, etc.?
Thank you. Let me say how delighted I am to be part of this panel of distinguished scholars who have respected, who have drawn upon. Allow me to begin by saying that when I wrote my first booklet kind of a pamphlet, I had invited Professor Ashok Gulati to be on the panel. So I really respect their opinions and have learned a lot over the years. Also allow me to make a general observation before I specifically answer your question, which is The revolt itself, what has this revolt achieved? What is the consequence? There is a view which I read very often that seems to suggest that revolt means no more reforms, we are back to status quo, and that we might as well write off agricultural reforms. I don't take that view. I think it's very important for us to understand that this is actually the beginning of real, genuine reforms. I say so because the word reform has been captured by one kind of ideology. If we were to go back to the original English use of the word, which is, things that benefit someone. So I think it restores the word reform to the benefit of farmers, puts the welfare of farmers at the center of it, and tells us that we need more state intervention, not less. That's the perspective I'll follow in some of the remarks that I make. Specifically on this question, I think we must make a distinction between two things. And that's the only small quibble I have about Shoumitro's presentation. We must distinguish between MSP regime and procurement regime. These are two different things. The first involves simply a decision that state shall intervene and state shall take the price route to supporting the farmers and shall use remunerative price as a mechanism for that. It can take hundreds of forms. Second is the procurement regime, namely the decision to procure certain amounts of certain crops at certain points in a certain mechanism. And to my mind, much of the problems that Shoumitro had identified, very rightly so, and I don't disagree with him at all these are problems of the procurement regime. Unfortunately, the blame is laid at the doors of MSP, as if MSP is the problem. I think we must distinguish between these two things. So what do I want to respond specifically to your question? When the farmers movement says, and unfortunately, this is a very widespread misunderstanding, that farmers leaders and farmers movements are saying that the government should procure all the produce of all the 23 crops, which is followed by a big laughter. Is it possible? How ridiculous? And so on and so forth. Actually, that's not what the farmers movement has demanded. I've been on that committee of 9, which has coordinated this movement. Believe me, we have discussed this question for hours. And except half an hour of one particular member who was easily persuaded by everyone else, no one says that all the 23 crops should be purchased by the government and put in some go down to rot. No. What we are saying is that a remunerative price, that farmers should receive, all the farmers of this country must receive a remunerative assured price. We are completely open to the mechanism through which it will be done. That's the overall position. Specifically, my position on how it should be achieved, I think it's a combination of 5 things. Number 1, the existing procurement should continue and be expanded. Expanded to include millets, dal, pulses, as your committee had rightly recommended, and oilseeds. Number 2, deficiency payment mechanism should be used at a much wider scale than is currently being used. Madhya Pradesh had a disastrous experience with that, but recently Haryana has come up with a much better model. I'll be happy to speak about it later. Number 3, market intervention. Limited procurement, and that's another small quibble with the Shoumitro. I think the indirect effects of limited market intervention are very big. I am from Haryana. Haryana government has done Bajra procurement. I've followed Bajra for the last 5-6 years. Haryana government did Bajra procurement. Rajasthan did nothing about Bajra procurement. However, because there was procurement happening in Haryana, the prices in Rajasthan picked up. And in Haryana itself, prices of the crop that did not go to procurement for various administrative reasons, that also picked up. So limited market intervention, Unfortunately, the government of India has very little funds for that. That should be expended. Number 4, predictable export-import policy. Predictable and something which is known to farmers before they sow the crop. They don't. And unfortunately, there is simply no connect. But people like, you would know much better. I think those who frame agriculture policy in this country and those who frame agriculture import-export policy don't speak to each other at all. So we need to have a combined, so that that export-import things can be used sometimes. I can get into details. And finally, one legal clause should be used, but as a measure of last resort, not as a first resort. Namely, that no purchase below MSP. It can be made legally punishable, although I know the problems in it. I know the entire trade can go underground if you use that as the only mechanism. But as a measure of last resort, having done these 4, you could introduce that 5th one as well. So a basket of all these 5 things, loaded primarily in favor of expended procurement and deficiency payment, should work.
Lovely. Yogendra, that's excellent, because you've set out. Now, in the interest of just making it a little spicy, and let me go straight to Ashok. I'll come to you, Mekhala and Harish, in just a moment. I want to go to Ashok because just for our viewers and listeners, Ashok was actually nominated by the Supreme Court of India to kind of write a report on how this whole legal MSP regime should work. Of course, once everything was withdrawn, we don't know what Ashok actually said in the report. Maybe we'll never know. But Ashok, can you just respond? I don't want you to respond to the export-import, because I know we're all in agreement on that. We'll come to that. I want you to respond more to expand, go towards PDP, and make the minimum a legal clause. So could you please respond to these 3, please?
Well, first, let me thank Ashu and you for inviting to this distinguished panel. And my compliments to Shoumitro for an excellent presentation with loaded facts. On the things that you have put on the table for me to respond as a spice, let me say to start with the 5th point of our friend Yogendra Yadav. Just a qualifier before I respond to that. All of us, I think, are in agreement that Indian agriculture and the farmers need to be supported and helped. My whole lifetime work is for the benefit of the farmers. So that's a qualifier I want to put. But let me start with the 5th point that Yogendra ji has put on the table, making MSP as a legal binding on nobody can buy below that MSP. It's a recipe for disaster in the economy. Let me put it this way. If we want to go into more details, I can go. On the other points, MSP to continue to the extent and expand it to some other crops, pulses and oilseeds. You are very well aware, Arvind. In fact, I had openly said to the finance minister in that meeting that you are anti-farmer if you don't open up the exports of pulses, when pulses prices had dropped, 6 million tons of imports were coming and 6 million production had increased. And you remember that note that we did for you, what are the best things that we can get it done. And you were, Ashok Lavasa in that meeting was saying we are procuring 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs. I said you have to procure at least 2 million tons because the production has jumped to 24 million tons. So I was very much into that if the prices have suddenly dropped because of whatever the constellation of policies we had followed, then the government may step in. But it is good to give a marginal support at a time when the prices crash, because that was the purpose of the procurement and the minimum support price. But when you take over the entire surpluses, what is happening in Punjab and Haryana, and let me give you a little field experience on that. Shoumitro put it greatly that how the survey data and the FCI data are so very different. And that's ground experience, my field experience. I went to Bihar, went to the farmer without telling who I was, and asked him, do you want to sell your produce? He said, yes, at this price. I said, the MSP price is 20%, 25% higher than this. Don't you know about that? He said, yes, I do know. If I take it to the railway station after cleaning up my paddy and put it in a nice bag, then at the railway station, I can get 5-7% even more, but still that will be 15%, 20% below the MSP. I said, why don't your chief minister procures? Is there a procurement center at the railway station? He said, no, the rails are going all the way from Bihar to Punjab to sell paddy. And this is a fact, the trucks and the trains go all the way from Bihar and Eastern UP to sell in Punjab and Haryana. So that's how one of the factors why the procurement in Punjab and Haryana is much more, one of the factors, because it is coming from other states. And as you rightly said, Shoumitro, that Punjab Artiyas do not exclude any farmer. They have no incentive to exclude any farmer. I would say they have all the incentive to include all the farmers of the country, because that's how they become rich, by charging higher and higher taxes. So I took up that matter with Nitish Kumar, the chief minister of Bihar. I asked him why you are not procuring. He said it's a den of corruption. I don't want to get into this mess. I went to the food minister of Punjab. I said, do you know all these trucks and trains are coming all the way from Bihar and Eastern UP to sell? He said, yes, we are aware. It's a great deal for us because the Punjab government charges such high taxes. We get 5,000 crores from that, and we give 5,000 crore free subsidy, free power to the farmers. All votes are ours. The money is of the center. So that's the politics behind this procurement business. But I do take the point that if the prices are crashing, then some limited procurement has to be there, and the government can step in. But taking over the markets, as we have done in rice and wheat, I think we are leading to disaster. Shoumitro, I think if you can add the cost of overflowing stocks, as on 1st of January, the FCI had 4 times more stocks than the buffer stock norms. The value of that at economic cost is 2.14 lakh crores. That is about $28 billion. Now, if that is the dead capital sitting with FCI, if it was sitting with any private sector, it will drown in 6 months. But our Bharat Desh Mahan Food Corporation of India. So we have to look at the costing of this entire open-ended procurement. Limited procurement for larger number of commodities, I have no problem with that. Then there was a point, remunerative prices. What is remunerative price? At present, government is following MSP formula, cost A2 plus FL, family labor cost, 50% on top of that at least. For paddy, it is 50% higher than that cost. For wheat, it is 100% higher than that. And that's where you lead to accumulation of stocks, because those can't be exported. In paddy, I'll give you what is happening on the export front. Arvind, you have specialized in exports and import policies, but let me give you a flavor of what is happening on exports of rice. Last year, we exported 17.7 million tons of rice in a global market of about 45-46 million tons. This year, we are going to be exporting roughly about 20 million tons. We are bringing down the global prices of rice, a perfect case for optimal export tax. How this is happening? Our export unit price is way below the MSP price. Why they are not selling here? It is a huge leakage from the public distribution system, because when you want, your rice is costing you about 40 rupees a kg, and then you want to sell at 3 rupees a kg through PDS. In Bihar, it is a dumping. First, the Bihar farmers are selling all going through Artiyas to Punjab to sell, and the same rice comes back to Bihar and is dumped at 3 rupees to the same farmers, because most of those PDS beneficiaries are the farmers. The average holding size there is just less than 0.4 hectares. So the same farmers, rice farmers, by adding 40% cost on top of MSP, then that leaks away and part of that gets exported.
So Ashok,
So last,
yeah.
1 second on this, because you asked me to respond to these things on price deficiency payment. My feeling is, we worked very closely on this with the Madhya Pradesh government. In one season, they raised their hands because the way the traders can play that game by offering even a lower price than the actual market was, because now they say government is going to pay you. So how much is the budget? What is the economic cost of this? We have to study it very carefully. I can go into that issue in a positive inclination. But the last thing is, and that's my last point, we have to conceptually be clear. Price mechanism is primarily for allocating resources efficiently. The moment you try to increase income through prices, this is what was taught in our masters. There is efficiency objective and there is equity objective. There is an income policy to achieve equity objective, and there is a price policy to achieve efficiency objective. If you try to achieve equity through price policy, you will mess up the economy.
Yeah.
And that's what
okay.
my last.
Sorry, Arvind, can I come in for just a second? Very important point, very briefly made by Ashok. Ashok said a legal MSP will be an incalculable disaster. Can he speak to that for 2 more minutes? Do you mind, Arvind? So that our audience can understand what the point is. That's a direct attack on what the farmers movement is demanding. Why is it an incalculable disaster, a legal MSP?
First, what is the sanctity of this 50% higher prices than the cost of it? You are going to raise the inflation by at least by 15-20% more than what the actual situation is, number one. Therefore, you have to protect the poor consumers, same people. You will have to have massive food subsidies or income transfers on that end, and how much is your budget. Number two, you will be totally priced out. The private sector, which is doing all the food processing or many other things, because this is a whole chain, that will be messed up into the inefficiency of it. So this government diktat, and I'm sure Yogendra can come up again, that Swaminathan formula did not say even A2 plus FL, but even C2 plus 50%, which is another 30% on top of that. That's, it doesn't have the basic demand and supply question in the price game. And price is basically determined by demand and supply.
Yogendra, just a minute, sorry. So just to kind of just take stock here, and Ashok put it well, Yogendra wants to use minimum prices, extended procurement, a bit more procurement, but with much more flexibility on procurement. Ashok, if I read you right, based on the last statement, you want to basically, what you didn't say is that you would supplement, you would allow prices to be broadly determined in the market with some MSP and things, but you would supplement it with direct benefit transfers as appropriate, as the income mechanism, if you wanted to provide some minimum incomes. So that's kind of the broad distinction. So now let me go to Harish, and then I'll come to Mekhala in just a second. Harish, it's a point that Ashok said, which is the point you've been making, that, look, India, we have become the victims of our own success in cereals, which is that because MSP and procurement have been so successful, it's led to a lot of production. And as Ashok said, we have now huge stocks of both rice and wheat. And therefore, against this, what one might even call a secular, surplus, as it were, as an offset to secular stagnation, this secular surplus in agriculture means we have to think more about protecting farmers against the downside of lower prices, And hence, you are broadly more in agreement with Yogendra that you should have much more extensive price deficiency payments. Can you elaborate, please?
Yeah, that's right. I'm more in agreement with Yogendra, this thing. Though I'm not at all in agreement with making MSP compulsory for the trader. I mean, it's not the private trade or it's not their job to pay the MSP. But I believe definitely in some kind of a price deficiency. See, I'll tell you, agriculture is the only business in the world where you have both production and price risks. Okay, production risks, it starts right from the time of sowing, right till harvest. Farmers can miss the optimal sowing window. I can't sow at this time because of the monsoon gets delayed. Then they can be mid-season dry spells, right? Then they can be pest and disease attacks, and then rain at the time of harvest, and we have seen last 2 years, this is happening, whatever, climate change, whatever this thing is. No ordinary businessman, you forget or farmer, can handle both production and price risks. Okay, this is the first point. The second point in agriculture is, you have very long gestation period for any crop. Okay, in say paddy, wheat, most field crops, say it may be from say about 80, 90 days to say 140, 150 days. Okay, in cotton, it could be 180 to 210, 220 days. In sugarcane, the farmer is locking his land for actually about 21 months, 11 to 12 months, it's for the plant cane. Okay. And then another 9 to 10 months for the ratoon crop that grows from the stubble of the plant cane. Okay. In milk, the time between inseminating a cow and its calving, assuming that pregnancy happens, is 9 to 10 months. Okay. And once calving happens, then after that, the milk will keep flowing from the animal's udders for the next 300, 310 days, right? And you can't plug an animal's udders, right? I mean, the milk will keep flowing, okay? And the calf, assuming it's a female, okay, it'll take about 17, 18 months to come into puberty. And again, you add another 9 to 10 months of pregnancy for it to calve. So we are talking of both production risks and long gestation periods, which are inherent. So I think the case for some kind of price certainty at the time of harvesting and marketing of crop, I think it's a self-evident case. Now whether you call it MSP and whether this MSP is based on A2 plus FL or C2, that doesn't matter. But the fact is, you need some kind of a price certainty. Okay, and the need for price certainty, it becomes more pronounced in the kind of scenario which we are seeing, production gluts, structural surpluses, and which we are seeing, which is actually new to India, and what we are seeing is what the US underwent during the Great Depression, and European Union from the 1970s. You had things like mountains of butter, lakes of milk, wine, etc. Right. So basically what we are going through today is what the West went through, much earlier. Okay. So when you have in these kind of, generalized, whatever, as you're saying, secular gluts, farmers become naturally risk averse. Okay. That's why we are seeing in the last 6-7 years, farmers increasing production of wheat, paddy, sugarcane, cotton, and you look at the combination. These are all of them are safe crops, okay, because they are all grown under irrigated conditions, okay, even cotton, right? At least, number two, these are all procured by government agencies. Okay, and on top of it, you have, all the public sector varietal breeding is happening in wheat, in paddy, right? I mean, the yields, the genetic yields are just increasing, so you are having today a very vicious cycle. Okay, so according to me, given the kind of risk-reward equation today, the farmers have become very risk averse. So they are very rational. That's why they are producing these things. So I don't see a way out of it unless you extend MSP to all crops, and that has to be combined with crop area planning. Okay, I'll give you price deficiency provided you grow these crops. Otherwise you'll have the Telangana kind of situation. I think Shoumitro's slides showed Telangana. Telangana is a very interesting case. I mean, they increased irrigation area a lot. Right, I mean, their coverage. I mean, you had the Kalishwaram, the lift irrigation project, Mission Kakatiya, and what did the farmers do? They just increased production of paddy. Today, paddy. In fact, Telangana is today number 2 after Punjab in paddy. And they increase, and they are number 1 in cotton. I think Telangana is a very interesting case. Where you bring in irrigation, and what do farmers do? You think that they'll grow more whatever vegetables, fruits. That's not happening, because what is happening today is your incomes are not growing. Right? See, we had there was a period when incomes were growing, and automatically your consumption of chicken, eggs, milk, fruits, vegetables were growing. That's how you had crop diversification. So today your incomes are not growing. So there's no demand. And when there's no demand, farmers become risk averse. And when they are risk averse, they produce more of paddy, wheat, and this thing. So I'm very clear that if it is a farmer, if the farmer has to be in business, he has to be assured of price. Okay, and no farmer today wants any. I can tell you, farmer, if you're giving this income transfer per acre, per hectare kind of a thing, that's the dole. Okay, that's not for, I mean, whether a farmer produces or not, everybody gets a PM Kisan. No, the farmer is not wanting that. Farmer wants a price, a remunerative price, as Yogendra is saying. And I think that's very, I mean, it's a very justified, I mean, something like a minimum wage, right? I mean, the worker is not asking for a wage just sitting at home, right? I mean, because he cannot work at home like us, right? I mean, the farmer is similarly asking that, when I am producing, when I have taken these risks, and after this, at the end of the day, I need a fair price. I don't give me, I don't want any freebie or anything, but I think this is the way. I think there is both the moral as well as economic case. I think I'll stop here.
Yeah. Okay. So Mekhala, so here you have, 3 kind of, fairly distinctive approaches to this. You have a kind of a refreshingly kind of different, perspective on this. So how would you, in some ways, kind of, would you do things that are completely different from what Harish, Ashok, and Yogendra are saying? Or would you tweak what they're saying, or just tell us how you would, approach this?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Arvind. So, it's great to be on this panel. So thanks very much for including me in it as well. But, look, I think for me, I came into this very differently. I spent, the last 12 years as an anthropologist studying agricultural markets on the ground, beginning with the state Madhya Pradesh, which many people have mentioned already here. And so I want to I didn't come at it from the point of view of national policy or what anybody or one group or others might want, but to try and understand what was happening on the ground. How do markets really work? And MP in that sense is a very interesting state study. I started my fieldwork in 2008, where it had 30 years of soybean, which really was a huge transformation in that state. Sorry, I see my is fluctuating, but you can hear me?
Yeah, but you're going in and out.
I'm audible? Yeah. Okay, so is it stable now?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, Madhya Pradesh is an interesting state because when I started studying in 2008, soybean had been there for the last 35, 40 years. And soybean did have state intervention, but it didn't have an MSP that was really the driving force. It was driven, there was oil-fed. There was a national oilseeds mission. There was concerted effort by the state to promote soybean. And here both center and state governments, but it was predominantly led by private markets, right? There was oil-fed. There was a critical moment where the state did come in and have cooperatives, which also supported the growth of soybean, but it was very much led by, and in fact, regional private enterprise led, sort of those markets in the development of soybean. Then when I started my work, there was no procurement. Madhya Pradesh's mandis did not see procurement. So today, when we see the kind of data that Shoumitro is showing on wheat procurement, where MP and Chhattisgarh, both, it's a post-2008 phenomenon, where you see both of these states grow in paddy and wheat procurement. So you saw wheat procurement actually grow in a period of 5 years, right? And with it, the production of wheat has grown. With it, many of the familiar problems that we see in other states, and particularly in Punjab and Haryana, with groundwater extraction in certain areas, the growth and the shrinking of other varieties, both of wheat and of other crops, right? We saw that happen. And the reason Madhya Pradesh picked wheat, we have to remember, is because this was the main central pool, wheat and paddy, right? At another point, Madhya Pradesh could have, and it's interesting to see a state like Odisha today, could have focused on pulses. If there had been a different imagination of what kinds of support could be given to farmers. It's a major pulse growing state as well. And so you've seen paddy grow more than pulses. Wheat grow more than pulses. You've seen varieties of wheat diminish, but farmers have definitely benefited from an increase in prices, and they've seen, and contributed in central pool. So what I have observed is both the dynamism of agriculture and the entrenched political economy that very quickly comes in, right, whenever you have a change. And I think Shoumitro's points about mechanism are incredibly important, because Madhya Pradesh was a state where the state government had actually abolished artyas in the 1990s. I've credit to, right? And procurement.
Mekhala, I think your thing is unstable.
Am I stuck again?
Yeah, your thing is unstable.
Yeah. So okay, so I don't know if I'm now back.
You're back.
If I'm not, I will. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'll try once more, and otherwise I'll.
You might release your video, because that will lower the bandwidth.
I think that will be better.
Nice.
You can take out your.
Yeah. Let's do that, and also, or if you can give me.
Why, Mekhala, you back? No. Okay. While Mekhala's come back, Yogendra, please respond.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So let me quickly. Okay. Let me change my connection, and maybe Yogendra can answer till I do that.
Yeah. Yogendra, please respond to Ashok, who says that this is a bad idea, a minimum legal price.
You see, the pleasure of disagreeing with Professor Gulati is, and I genuinely mean it, because his writings have always put the farmers first. So it's a genuine disagreement. And he has not been afraid of critiquing any government, including Modi government, when he thought it was not doing things which he thought were in the interest of the farmers. That's why it's such a pleasure to disagree with him. On the fifth point that I had made, making it legally mandatory, if you would recall, right there I had said, if anyone thinks that making it legally mandatory by itself is a silver bullet solution, no, it's a disaster by itself. If you do only this one thing and don't do anything else, all the trade will go underground and it will be a disaster. So if this is your principal mechanism, it's bad, and I completely agree with Professor Gulati. I meant it only as a secondary mechanism once you have done the first four things that I mentioned. On the Professor Gulati has a couple of things which are more theoretical, almost ideological. How do we determine fair price? Well, yeah, there is no sanctity to it, but we arrive at it for all kinds of things in the world. I'm sure we can arrive at it on this as well. It'll push up inflation. Yes, it does, but so does ban on child labor. So do minimum wages. I mean, these are somewhat ideological points we can argue later. The real question is, and that I want to push Professor Gulati on that one. Why do we conflate price regime with MSP regime? MSP regime with procurement regime. All the problems you mentioned, sir, rightly so, are problems of the procurement regime, specifically of the following things, which are not necessary at all. Number one, I do not know who, when, and how. Maybe scholars here can tell me. they fused two policies which originated entirely differently. There was the MSP policy and there is a PDS policy, aiming entirely at different segments at two different points of time with two different objectives. At some stage, they've got fused. So you procure only those things which you need for PDS. Now, who said so? This is what has led to the entire distortion. That's the one thing. Second, the skewed nature of procurement, that you would procure only 2 or 2.5 crops out of 23. That is the root of the problem. So the problem is not too much procurement. The problem is too little procurement. The fact that we have for some reason restricted it only to 2 crops and to only 2 or 3 states. Now it's actually 4 or 5 states, but primarily in 4 or 5 states, and through mechanisms which favor the rich, the landed, the farmers with greater land than the bigger farmers over smaller farmers. Shoumitro is absolutely right on that. But these are problems of the existing procurement regime. These become decisive arguments against price mechanism if Professor Gulati can demonstrate that you cannot have a price approach without skewed procurement, without regional bias, and without combining PDS with MSP, PDS with MSP purchase. One quick point about a very important thing that Harish mentioned. I was thinking of this independently, that actually, you need to marry MSP procurement with local crop planning. So instead of saying, this unlimited procurement of anything, this can be clearly restricted. It should be restricted. I come from Haryana. I'll quickly stop here. I come from Haryana. In Haryana, we don't know how to eat rice. I actually mean it. When I was a child, I did not know that you could eat rice with dal. I thought rice was a sweet dish which you had once in a month. Why do we produce so much paddy in Haryana? The reason, sir, is skewed procurement policy. That should be stopped. And the moment you tie it up with the district level crop planning, which does exist, and you say, in district Mahendragarh, we will not give you 1 penny of MSP if you grow paddy. Perfect. Why don't we do that?
Okay, Mekhala, I'd like you to finish what you were saying, please, because now you're back.
Yeah. I'm back, and also, just to take off the point you just mentioned about paddy in Haryana, that was similar to the point I was making about the imagination of doing only wheat in Madhya Pradesh, right? Wheat could certainly have been supported in certain districts of Madhya Pradesh, but in the pulse growing parts of Madhya Pradesh, you could have actually had a different imagination for what crops should have been supported by the state in a procurement, with procurement. So I think, MP is an interesting state for this reason, because you saw the play of markets, right? Well before, the current farm laws were enacted and then repealed, you saw a state amend its APMC acts in, early up in 2002, 3, 4, to allow private sector to buy outside of mandis, to have procurement centers that the private sector ran. So you had a multiplicity of alternatives, right? And I think I come from looking at states like Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra. These are other, models altogether. So I think what happened in the last year or year and a half has been this focus on the problem with Punjab and Haryana, as if that is the problems of all states, or even all parts of Punjab and Haryana, I would say, where, we saw in our work in Hoshiarpur, very different dynamics, even in the states, in the districts of Punjab and Haryana, but certainly we made it seem like this is the problem of all states. And secondly, I want to sort of say something which I think people have not mentioned so far. We are assuming that the state only intervenes when it comes to MSP, whether it's done through procurement or a range of other mechanisms. And I'm in agreement with, I think everyone here who says that we can look at diverse mechanisms. And this idea that that's MSP procurement regime as it happens today is the only imagination we can have. And I think if you go to the different states of India, you already see a different imagination on the ground. But we don't pay enough attention to the role of the state as a regulator and in regulation. And I think it's quite ironic that the farm laws came in to try and change the regulatory regime. And the entire conversation is now only about MSP and procurement, as if the state does not have an important role to play in the regulation of agricultural markets, right? When I started my research, it was still, again, now we're looking, 12, 14 years ago, pro and anti-APMCs. As if just like with pro and anti-MSP procurement, you have only one model. You had to go be pro mandis and the current APMC regime, or you have to be anti the current APMC regime and open it up to free markets. And I think we have to understand that agricultural markets have certain characteristics. There are deep asymmetries in the way these markets are structurally organized. They are markets where you have a very large number of sellers, and typically in any local area, a small number of buyers. Right? That is why they are open to various kinds of cartelization and other kinds of asymmetries. The whole purpose of, of mandis was to actually provide better marketplaces, multiple market sites. And none of us, I think at this point, would argue that it has to be only the APMC mandi. We need multiple market sites, but that doesn't mean a deregulated regime. Again, like MSP procurement, like everything in India, it is open to vested interests. It is open. They're markets after all. There will be local dominant groups. There will be trader cartels. But that's precisely why you have good regulation, right? And the point, so I think somewhere in this entire discussion, it's like there's MSP procurement and then there's the market. And what we don't pay attention to is the multiple diverse ways in which the state engages with the market. And a good regulatory system is part of that. It needs to be multi-leveled. It needs to have multiple options. But we have seen across, and I certainly saw this in MP, but we've seen it in Karnataka and in other states, where the presence of a mandi, right, a well-regulated physical market matters to farmers. Price discovery can be done better, right? And these are physical markets. They are not virtual markets. They are not electronic markets. In actual fact, they are physical markets. Technology can play a very interesting role in price discovery, in improving auctions and doing a whole range of things, but they are physical markets, and we never invested in them. So alongside the problems where we talk about great regional diversity with MSP procurement regime, there is also enormous diversity in the ways in which states have actually invested in improving market infrastructure, improving market regulation, supporting different kinds of traders, different kinds of buyers, building infrastructure, and to assume that this is something that the market does on its own. It doesn't for multiple reasons. I mean, the soybean story is an interesting one, but the state has always supported this. It has to be conjunctural, and within that, the risks are there. So, I mean, I just want to put that back in this mix, because I think somewhere we've just, we are acting as if there's only this set of issues.
True. So in fact, I want to build upon that, Mekhala, and segue into the next thing. So this is for all of you. When I look at Shoumitro's charts on, the imbalance in the transfers, supposing I were a small Tamilian farmer, and I look at those numbers and say, look, the center is favoring, supposing I'm a small pulses farmer in Tamil Nadu, I say, it all goes to Punjab, it all goes to the big farmer, it all goes to the thing, and this is, my taxpayer money. So the question I have is that regardless of what you're saying, and that's point one. Point two is that, agriculture is a state subject. State governments should have responsibility and be accountable for agriculture. So my question to you is, regardless of what you're saying, whether it's price deficiency payment, whether it's direct benefit transfers, whether it's whatever, why shouldn't state governments take much more responsibility, both fiscal and regulatory, for whatever they want to do? Why is it always about the center? Ashok.
Okay, I think very good question. And I think in the last response of Yogendra ji. We are making some good progress. But let me first appreciate the points that Harish had put on the table, that farmers face the production risk and the market risk, and we have to do something to minimize that. So I'm in full agreement with that statement. How do we do it? That is an issue. Whether the government, Punjab is 99% irrigation. So whether there is a drought or not drought, their production is not impacted. So irrigation is one way to bring, contain the production risks of vagaries of nature. Maharashtra may be just 20% irrigation, and Punjab is 99% irrigation. So the two face different, production risks. Now, to cover the production risk, the way all the world over is crop insurance. And that's where PM Fasal Bima Yojana was expanded. But it was done that the state also has to put in something, and the center will also put in literally 90% subsidy on the premium is given. But in the implementation, which is the duty of the states, what had happened was they would not even do the shortlisting of the companies that have to do the crop insurance, even when the IMD, Indian Meteorological Department, has announced whether it is going to be a good rainfall year or bad rainfall year. Whereas everything had to be done by January or latest by February, up to March, April, they will not do it. So the implementation problems have been. So the instrument to cover the production risk is more, either you stabilize production through irrigation, which we are at 50% irrigation, to take it to 85% irrigation, 90% irrigation, it's going to cost you hell. And it is the groundwater that is depleting very fast, and you can't recharge that really in any meaningful way. Shoumitro's slide showed how groundwater. On the market risk, which is the point on the prices, there are market instruments, and there are what Yogendra ji is putting also on the table, and Harish is. Harish wants to go for some sort of price deficiency payment. I have my serious doubts on the operationalization of that, because I was closely associated with what happened in Madhya Pradesh, and we are watching very closely even the Haryana one. Let them do for any bigger crops. These titbits here, small crops, have no meaning. They have listed 30 fruits, aloo, pyaz, gobi, pata nahi kis kis ka wo karenge. We'll come down to that. But I do take the point that on the price risk, what are the instruments that we need to do? To me, the future markets is the first thing we should be looking at. So the farmers should be planning their cropping decisions based on future prices rather than on last year's prices. This is the biggest mistake we do. Last year prices were good, therefore everybody moves in that direction, and next year there is overproduction and collapse in prices, and then everybody starts. So we need futures markets in place. Second, we need warehouse receipt system, so that if there is a surplus, it can be put at one place, and there should be loans given to whether FPOs or traders or farmers for the marketing of the produce. The problem is we give highly subsidized loans to the farmers for production, crop production, but not for the marketing of the produce. So they bring it immediately after the harvest when the prices have to collapse. So we need to devise a much better warehouse receipt system which can be negotiable. So those are the market instruments to get the markets functioning much better. I would still go for that. Even after those, there is some minimum procurement that has to be done for other crops. You and me were in that state when you were in those corridors, and we went in for literally zero procurement of pulses to 2 million tons of procurement of pulses. But I want to put it on record. Yogendra Yadav ji, do you say that we have to limit, and that's what you said, we have to limit the procurement of wheat and rice? Can we do that in the name of how much production is there in different states and allocate a quota? That is what the federalism would be. Your point that it is a state subject, if the production is a state subject, marketing also could be a state subject, and let the center distribute all this money of PDS and procurement together, including fertilizer subsidy or others, and put that give them to the states and let them run their show on the marketing side. If open market procurement is a disaster.
So Ashok, so sorry, then do you agree with the proposition that there's a high inequity in resource transfers to some states? And given that agriculture is a state subject, much more responsibility for anything, whether it's price deficiency, warehousing, should lie with the states. Do you agree with that proposition?
Sure. In fact, my first battle when I joined the government as a Prices Commission chairman was, you are doing so much procurement in Punjab and Haryana, why don't you do it in Bihar? Because that's where the farmers are suffering. And the problem was, oh, it's the state has to come forward. And when I went to the chief minister, I told you, he said, this is a den of corruption. I don't want to get into that. And FCI didn't want to touch that. So the policies that we devised during the hugely deficit years of 1965, when we were living from ship to mouth, they have outlived their age. They cannot be the policies for surplus years. This is a fundamental understanding that we have to get.
Yeah. So can I ask the others, do you think states should be more responsible in this? Yogendra, Harish, Mekhala? And then we have to come to, I want to come at the end to the environmental problem and the Punjab, Haryana rice problem. Yep. We'll come to that at the end. But Yogendra and Harish and Mekhala, why are we not putting more responsibility? Because if anything, I would say that, Mekhala's Madhya Pradesh example is actually a great example of where, Madhya Pradesh took the initiative and said, not the pricing, of course, not the subsidy, but certainly the procurement and everything. It took the lead. It improved the welfare of its farmers. And electorally, I think it's fair to say that Shivraj Chauhan did very well, at least in the first 1 or 2 cycles, because of having helped agriculture. So why can't we transfer this both political, administrative accountability and responsibility more to the states? And how do we do that?
Can I just add one thing to it? Is the issue fiscal capacity of states versus fiscal capacity of Delhi?
No, but even there, Ashutosh, that's not, because as Ashok says, if you have a fixed pool of money, just, give it to them. I mean, at some stage we'll have to reduce it, but that's not the issue. We're going to, let's say transfer that.
Okay.
Going by constitutional scheme of things, yes, states have the responsibility. States should do it. Going by logistics, administration, feasibility, sensibility, yes, states should do it. Sitting in Delhi and sitting in Raipur makes whole world of a difference. What do bureaucrats sitting in Delhi know about difference between Bastar and other parts of Chhattisgarh? So sure, it makes sense. The problem is exactly what Ashutosh has pointed out. Where is the money? I mean, we have a very funny federalism in this country. All the money goes to the center and all the responsibility lies with the states. What you are saying could also be said about education, could also be said about health, could be said about so many things in this country. Where is the money? Telangana seems to have some money.
No, Yogendra, that I'm not going to let you think, because I think if you look at state government finances, it's true that we could, whatever we can talk about things, but they spend on power subsidies. They send on, state enterprises which are going nowhere. I mean, if they really wanted to, they can find the money. And as Ashoka said, we could have some, the existing central subsidies could be kind of in some ways transferred as well. So I think to say they don't have resources, I think I don't fully buy that.
You would know better than I do, but I visit Rajasthan. I try and look at what they are doing, and if one of the reasons why Rajasthan government does practically no procurement when the next door Haryana does is simply finances, and I suspect this is true of many states. But you would know better. But I like the idea of a pool. Make it a pool. In fact, at some stage I had suggested that some proportion of the GST should be turned into an agriculture pool of the country. And then that should be handed over to states in proportion to some formula, and let them handle it. Yes, I like the idea. States should handle it. But at current stage to say states should do it, I'm sure the central government would love it. States should do it. It's their headache. I don't want to give them one penny, but it's their headache completely. I don't accept that. I don't think that's going to work at all on this. At some point, I'd like to comment on other things that Professor Gulati has.
We'll come back, Yogendra, if you don't mind. Mekhala, Harish, and then I'll give you a chance. Mekhala, yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, I mean, I think this is such an important point. And I do want to say from the Madhya Pradesh example, but also from Karnataka, also from Maharashtra, and also from Odisha, we are not paying enough attention to the history of what states have done. And it is not only fiscal. I mean, some of the most important market reforms that happened in Madhya Pradesh happened in the 1980s. And it was about changing the system. That was Digvijay Singh, and actually, it was the BJP that came in 2003 and pushed. It was 20 years of reforms to change and open up the mandi system. To build more agricultural markets, to build more market yards. Even internally in the state, it was differential. Certain parts of the state got more investment, others got less. This is true of irrigation as well. But the states did a lot. The Tawa Canal also, happened in the area that I worked. Irrigation change. Madhya Pradesh is a state which has had in certain areas watershed development. In Karnataka, ENAM, we talk now about ENAM, but the entire, electronic markets story is a really important story, and it's come out of Karnataka prior to ENAM becoming a national scheme, right? We have seen this across a large number of states. Maharashtra also opened up and has tried various things. Harish's recent work on sugarcane, right? His report has shown that 3 regimes in Uttar Pradesh, three governments have invested in different ways to develop sugarcane in that state, right? I think and actually, Yogendra, on this point, Madhya Pradesh also didn't have money for procurement, but it picked up the decentralized procurement scheme. So did Odisha, so did Telangana. So the decentralized procurement scheme has been available since 1998. State governments did not pick it up till the early 2000s. And then from 2005-06, a whole new group of states have used it. Now we are running into other problems between center state, like we are seeing in Telangana with KCR, and, and that you will see happen, right? There will be a tussle, which was my point, which is that the problem is when these initiatives get scaled up and schematized at the national level, we don't build in the kind of flexibility, either the fiscal flexibility or the scheme design flexibility, which is required for states to then take the initiative, right? So my point was, why could Madhya Pradesh in 2008 not have done pulses and a number of other crops which would have gone into its own PDS and ICDS programs? Now Odisha is doing millets. But millets don't come under the national procurement. So how does one, incentivize and grow that, right? So both in terms of scheme design, ENAM had the same problem, to the point that Karnataka, which had the most developed system of electronic markets, opted out of ENAM and said, we will not plug ourselves into a national scheme, right? So the problem arises when we design national policy and both fiscal flexibility is not provided, scheme design flexibility is not provided. There isn't good, we know today there is a whole politics of attribution in the political economy of who gets credit for what. But, NREGA, we know historically has come out of state innovation. We have had employment guarantees in states before. PDS reform came out of long work with the food, security movement, and, Chhattisgarh predates the innovation that happened, in Chhattisgarh predates. So, when it gets scaled up, taken up, there are problems. So I would actually say we are, selling states short by ignoring this history. We are also not holding current chief ministers responsible enough, because they can see that in their own past, there has been a lot more innovation at the state level. And so, yes.
So Harish, so what would you say to that? Making state governments more responsible, accountable?
See, first of all, I'm not very convinced about this whole thing, central transfers going more to Punjab than Bihar and Tamil Nadu or Orissa and kind of a thing. Look, the Punjab farmer is not responsible for the misery of the Bihar farmer. Okay, the Punjab farmer never said that you procure from me at 20 rupees and then you sell it at 2 rupees and 3 rupees. He didn't say it. Okay, we should be very clear that this entire food subsidy, it's not because of the farmers. Okay, fine. See, farmers are getting 20 rupees, etc. Okay, whatever. No farmer has said that you should give grain out free, right? I mean, if there is so much of gap between that MSP and this thing, the farmer is not to be blamed. Okay. The second thing which I want to say, which is from just to add to what Mekhala was saying. Look, states. There are some states which did a job of procurement, right? Nobody stopped Bihar from procuring. Why couldn't they do? Why is it that even in, say, UP, for example, actually Yogendra will bear me out, the farmer, you know, in Shamli or Muzaffarnagar, you know, he crosses the border to sell in Panipat or in Sonipat. Okay, why? Because if he sells in UP, in Hapod or in Muzaffarnagar, government doesn't buy. The people there, they don't pay. So do we blame Haryana for this? Okay, if Haryana has done for its farmers, if Punjab has done for its farmers, nothing stops others from doing the same thing. So I think we should be very clear on this thing. You know, it's very easy to make the Punjab farmer the villain. You know, everybody. I mean, suddenly now even I think the right is talking the language of the left. You know, Kulak and all those kind of stuff. You know, rich farmer. You know, that kind of a thing. See, which is not the case. You know, so the states can. I mean, if the states are interested, they can do it. And I'm very clear that even Punjab, if you want Punjab to reduce their paddy acreage, etc., say right now about, say, 35 lakh hectares, if you want to bring it down to, say, 15 lakh hectares, this has to be done with the center. You know, you cannot just leave it to the states and then suddenly the center says that I'm not going to do it. I'm giving you all the freedom. You do what kind of a thing? See, you need today a federal compact, you know, between the center and the states. And definitely Punjab farmer is not responsible for the misery of this thing. I think we should stop playing one state against the other. You know, nobody stops. I mean, you look at, for example, Telangana, this KCR, he has developed this whatever Kalishwaram lift irrigation project or the mission Kakatiya. Now he has done it. Who stops somebody else from doing it in Bundelkhand and this thing? So is the Telangana government responsible for it? I think we should be very careful in apportioning blame. You know, it should be we should not when you make policy, you have to be very clear what is happening. So if you want the Punjab farmer to move away from paddy, from wheat, you give him a price, right? I mean, you give that farmer the price. Tomorrow, if actually the government will procure arhar at 6,000 rupees, I can tell you the Punjab farmer will immediately switch. Farmers switch, you know, farmers respond to price signals better than any other thing, and it is very fast. You know, if today iron ore prices are fast, to discover a new iron ore to commercially, it takes 5 years, 10 years, right? Today, like a semiconductor, now there's a shortage. Now to set up a new foundry, it'll take years. Whereas a farmer will respond in the next season, you know. So we should recognize that, he'll do it next year.
So Harish, that's a very fair point. I mean, the point of showing those things wasn't to say blame the Punjab farmer, but I think what this leads to is the following, and let's get to it before we get Andrew, because we have now about 10 minutes left or 15 minutes left, is let's take this problem head on, this environmental problem, right? We know that, parts of Punjab and Haryana, they overproduce and therefore environmental consequences arise. And as Shoumitro's chart shows, that's also extending to other states like this. Now, here's I think we're all ducking the issue a little bit. It's easy to say, extend this and therefore, farmers will switch, but exit from existing entitlements is very, very difficult, right? So I think if we want the Punjab farmer to move away from whatever, I think it has to be part, you're absolutely right, part of a fiscal compact between the center and the states, right? It has to be done that way because after all, let's not forget the history. We did this because we wanted, as Ashok said, we went from ship to mouth. We wanted to get over that. And that's why we got into it in the first place. So the political economy of exit is very difficult, but it has to be done cooperatively and with the kind of with buy-in from all parties concerned. But my question, two questions. What do we do about the power and the fertilizer subsidy, which, I'm just making this as which are very crucial ingredients in environmental deterioration? And second, how do we tackle this problem of overproduction of rice in certain parts of the country? So a more general question and a more specific Punjab specific question. Maybe I should start this with Harish. Why don't you go first, because you've thought about this?
Yeah, I would say that in the case of Punjab, you can have a plan, say a 5-year plan. Okay, today Punjab has about say something like say 35 lakh hectares under wheat. And say about 35 lakh hectares in paddy. Okay, you can probably reduce that 35 lakh to say 15 lakh hectares. Okay, have a very clear plan. Okay, so and if you are having that kind of a plan, okay, then it has to be using the same instruments. Okay, you like as you're saying, you cannot exit an entitlement. It's not fair also. Okay, you cannot just suddenly just say that I'll do this thing. So you procure, so you procure maize. You procure this thing. You pay the farmer the price. It's very simple. I mean, paddy today I will get say 30 quintals per acre. Okay, if I grow arhar, I'll get say 10 quintals per acre. So that difference, you give me the higher price, right? I mean, so I should get the price of arhar, say 3 times of this thing, and you procure it. So this can happen, I think, over a period of 5 years. This cannot happen overnight, So it has to. There has to be. Am I audible? Sorry.
Yeah.
Ashok, you had a question?
Harish, because of shortage of time, when you talk about crop switching via pricing, the pricing mechanism, which is what you're proposing, won't you be given the environmental question now, and given how sharply Arvind has posed this, won't you be switching to less water using and less fertilizer using crops compared to
the challenge which even environmentalists will face is the paddy nowadays. Now you are going to have direct seeded paddy. Okay, which will save water. Already now farmers are now transplanting paddy after June 15th. So I can tell you the technologies today you are getting in paddy will reduce your water consumption by 50%. Then what do you do? Okay, so so the farmer will continue to grow paddy then, right? So the thing is, it has to be crop area planning. You have to reduce. You reduce it over 5 years, and if you reduce, I will pay you MSP, I will pay you price deficiency and this kind of a thing. If you don't give the farmer money, he will not do. If you give him money, he will rear desi cows. He will do zero budget natural farming. Anything you want to do, but you have to pay the guy. I mean, if you don't pay the guy and you tell him that you should keep desi guy, you should do this, that's not possible. Okay. So it has to be a plan. Yeah.
Ashok, respond to that, please.
Yeah, 2 points I want to put on the table. First, desi guy or hybrid guy, 50% of our agriculture, which is livestock, fishery, and horticulture, that is the value of our agriculture, 50%. There is zero MSP there, literally, right? It is all market determined. They face all the volatility. These are perishable commodities. Fishery is growing at, for the last 20 years, 9% per annum. Milk and meat is growing at 5 to 6% per annum. Horticulture is growing at 4 to 5% per annum. And our cereals are growing at 1.5% per annum. That's one point on the table I want to put. Number 2, you raised the most important question of environment. the duty of the government till yesterday was saving the people. Tomorrow it is saving the planet. And you cannot escape from that. We have done enough damage to the water table of Northwest India, which is one of the 3 hotspots in the world, not just India, world. And you are just counting depletion of water table. I'm counting the methane that is created, which is 200 times more damaging. The carbon dioxide, the carbon footprint of that is 200 times more. Nitrous oxide, the excessive use of urea that is being done. These are massive damages we have done to the environment, and we must get out of that. I want to put one little footnote here. Being a part of the government, I had prepared a plan, because in one of the years, working with the government, I said, unless you liquidate these huge, massive mountains of grains, MSP cannot be increased. And there was a big hassle within the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. And I prepared a 5-year plan for 5,000 crores for Punjab specifically, which Mr. Sharad Pawar took it to the Chief Minister at that time, that, corn consumes 3 irrigations, 4 irrigations upper limit, whereas paddy consumes 25 irrigations. So you will save a huge power subsidy. I said, you give that, and you give on top of this. Fertilizer consumption can be high in this also and there also, but a switch can be made. And poultry, because this is a feed material, corn is a very versatile crop, starch industry, poultry industry, and you can do, it's more a commercial than a food security thing. Finally, the center allocated not 5,000 crores, but 500 crores for diversification. It was a laughing stock. So I think we need to sit down with the states and some of the problematic states. It's not that, Punjab has done it and it's not the fault of those. This is a legacy issue. At that time, center had to step in because the country was starving.
Exactly.
Millions could have died. So Punjab was picked up as a natural place which had reasonably good irrigation.
True.
So they got the benefit of that. And by 85, the wise man of Punjab, Professor Joel, said, get out of this now and go for diversification. It's an old story, but as you said, vested interests go deep and then changes. So whether today ethanol can be from corn, that policy has been changed. So you can say, okay, we will procure corn and we give you 5 years to switch over. We will put in this much money, and corn can go for feed material of poultry, which is growing at 5-6% per annum. And you have environmental damage much less, and put it also in ethanol into that. So that type of, I think your center-state relation and a package. When I'm saying give it to the states, Yogendra Yadavji, please don't treat it no money. Whatever the money at present government is spending on procurement or PDS, you combine the two, even fertilizer subsidy, I would say give it to the states, let them devise a right strategy, because how the shoe pinches in different states will be different. So one size will not fit all.
On the environment, I really would love to hear you and Mekhala on the environment question, please.
Quickly. Inequities, state-wise inequities are a reality, a very harsh reality. The reason can be twofold. The reason can be that some have been pampered, or that a majority has been very seriously deprived. I think it would be tragic, morally tragic, to see these farmers of Haryana and Punjab, very few of who can afford what in urban areas we call a middle-class life. To call them pampered kulaks would be a tragedy. So yes, there are inequalities. The root cause for that inequality is failure, inability, lack of political will to extend the procurement regime to other parts of the country and to other crops of the country, which is related to the environmental question. Yes, water table going down, soil quality degradation. These should be absolutely vital national questions. What is the way out? Moral sermon is not the way out. Danda on states is not the way out. Incentivizing farmers is the only way out. Professor Gulati would know, while he spoke about corn, what was the price the farmers got the year before last for corn, sir? They got, I think, about 1,000 rupees when the MSP was 1,850 rupees. You have to be a fool in Punjab to get into corn. Chana, what happened to chana in Haryana? Chana is the best thing that could have happened to the land of Haryana. Haryana used to grow, 50% of Haryana used to grow chana. It has disappeared completely. I do not even get hare chole in Haryana because of price policy. So it is perverse incentives introduced by the currently defective, damaging procurement policy, which is what needs to be done away with. My dream, and I'll just take 2 minutes and be over. My dream is to have one integrated policy where price, procurement, crop insurance, Kisan Fasal card, Kisan card, all of these are integrated with a area-wise crop policy, which should be principally determined by environmental concerns. So I would say, in district this, here I have this much quota for this crop, this much quota for this crop for procurement purposes. You are free to grow anything in the world you want to, but I will give you MSP, and that MSP I shall give, not just declare. I shall give it for only these 3 crops and in this much quantity in this district. Make this policy and then link it to a universal crop insurance, which has to be a 3-tier insurance, but I'll not get into those details of it. Make sure that every cultivator, including the tenant cultivator, has a Kisan card. Actually, make sure that you do reverse of land reforms, namely assure the landowners that their land is not going anywhere. Allow this poor tenant to carry a card so that the fellow can actually get loans and other subsidies based on that. If we move in those directions, then we have a solution. It can be worked out, but it would mean more monetary commitment. There has to be a political will to put more money in agriculture and then hand it over to the states. I love that idea. But political will, and to my mind, coming back to the revolt, this is the one thing the revolt may have achieved. The revolt has put the farmers back as legitimate stakeholders for the future of India, not a part of a dustbin of history.
Mekhala, on environmental.
Yeah, so I mean, I just want to point out that all that has been talked about requires not just more financial allocation and political will, it also requires really deep investment in institutions. You know, whether it's crop planning, whether it's better regulated markets, whether it's futures markets, which we have been experimenting with in this country at various points and getting the design quite wrong. And it's not as inclusive as it should be. We've tried electronic spot markets. We've got all of this. Above all, the agricultural and agroecological effects actually requires us to not just invest money, but invest in good quality institutions. I mean, most of our primary agricultural cooperative societies, most, cooperatives, FPOs, these are institutions, we're talking about them as if they already exist or that they're easy to build. We've seen it, whether it's the, good case studies people talk about, like Amul, these take a long time and consistent investment. And we don't invest in these institutions. It's not just about allocations, right? It's also about taking that kind of capacity seriously. Again, even mandi boards, marketing institutions, these are all very important public investments that we don't make anymore. And historically, we have seen Shoumitro and I once did this thing where actually infrastructure funds, market infrastructure funds, existing allocations have been underutilized year on year on year. We are actually having a problem right now at a larger level in the economy on how we utilize money. So just to point out that I think state capacity and institutional capacity in public institutions is really important. On the environment front, I'd just make one very quick point. I think everybody has, addressed the fact that we need to think very seriously when we do procurement or a whole range of other kinds of supports about how we take environmental considerations into account. But I would like to say, and I think, Dr. Gulati also mentioned this, a lot of our production is actually not supported right now, and markets are not particularly great at safeguarding the environment either, left to themselves, because often you see quite a lot of extraction, and by the time you change your policy, or the farmers realize there's no more water or other things, you've already caused the degradation, right? So you can't assume that markets will sort this out on their own. And we saw this in Odisha, for example, where some farmers in Balasore district are moving to a paddy prawn cycle, and you're seeing saline ingress, you're seeing a whole range of other things in addition to market volatility. There's no government support for this at this point, so it's not led by the state. And so, in Meghalaya, where I'm working now, there are betel nut plantations, areca nut plantations coming up, in major parts of the state. There are other challenges. So again, to say that, our thinking around agroecology should really be focused only on government support would be, missing out a huge part of, and we know this from the US, we know this from other states, industrial agriculture has huge agroecological effects, not just the subsidies and, irrigation. Of course, that does too. And I want to mention this because we have to start thinking about sentinel sites for the environment. We have to have institutions that are embedded, that are looking ahead, right? Starting to forecast, think about what these combinations are looking like, because farmers will be dynamic, they will be responsive. Hopefully we get more agile policy as well. But for that, you need to have some kind of institutional structure that is looking ahead, and paying attention to what might happen, because neither the state nor the market has historically been great at safeguarding the environment. And so we're going to have to think differently about this again. So I come back to this point with saying that, we either talk about the state and then we leave it all to the market, or we assume the market will solve things, or then we hate the market and we want all the state. And this is not going to help anybody, because farmers engage deeply with the state and the market, and the two are deeply intertwined. So I would just end there.
Okay, Andrew, I want to, the very, very easy task of summarizing and critically evaluating the discussion is yours. Please.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate being invited to comment on this. With some trepidation that I do so. It's been a rich conversation with a lot of subtlety from a lot of different directions, and I'm afraid that any summary will make it seem less subtle. With that said, one of the things that we started off with a discussion of sort of focused around this idea of MSP and procurement. But if you listen to the, one of the basic principles we have in economics, that is that you don't like to solve multiple objectives with only one instrument, right? That you don't, if you have multiple objectives, that trying to sort of solve that with one thing with the MSP or procurement is going to be problematic, because it's going to create all kinds of distortions, which you then have to respond to in various ways. And I think it came out very clearly when listening to this panel that's not what this group is thinking about. And I just want to sort of emphasize and sort of run through, I kind of kept a list of all the different objectives that were mentioned along the way. One, of course, was proper investment by farmers in the face of a risky product. We want them to be able to do that because in the long run, that's going to increase productivity and wealth. But for an individual farmer faced with risk, they may not follow what we would like them to do. There's protection for poor farmers, small farmers that are among the most vulnerable people in society. We want to be able to do that. A lot of them are not going to be touched by any kind of procurement policy to the extent that they're just subsistence farmers. They hardly sell anything to the market anyway. They're just consuming it. Obviously, that objective may not be quite in line with MSP. State equity, right? That came up a lot, right? You have these differences across states. If we want to achieve that objective, how do we think about that? Another objective that came up in the course of the discussion was the possibility of rents and procurement, that a sort of a market-based procurement system could lead to sort of rents, and that's a source of inefficiency we'd want to be concerned about. A fifth issue we talked about was using procurement to supply the PDS. And I think that there's another objective. Okay, sixth objective that was talked about was let's keep consumer prices low and make sure that sort of the grain flows to consumers, supply chains work, and so forth. There's another objective. Then obviously one of the sort of central themes that was brought out in let's protect the environment is sort of there. And then the one thing that kind of crept through that perhaps wasn't as articulate as I would have liked, given my own work, is to ensure the proper transformation of agriculture. I don't think any of us wants Indian agriculture in 20 years to look like it does today. If so, we can't see the kinds of income growth that we all aspire to for the country. We can't have the same number of people involved in the same kind of same kinds of agricultural activities. We're going to need to see transformation. And so whatever we think about in terms of a policy is going to have to reflect that process. Okay. So what has come out of this discussion, okay, is in fact a whole different set of instruments. That is, a lot of the political discourse may be about procurement and minimum support prices, but in fact, there are lots of other things that came up in the conversation. Obviously, insurance came up, market regulation, market development came up, block grants came up, the need to encourage state innovation came up, the importance of essentially pricing environmental resources to the extent possible so that the environment doesn't get overly exploited is another example. And of course, I've only listed a sort of a number of them. And I hope what people will hear from this conversation is that there are multiple problems to be solved and there are multiple solutions, and that we can't let the political discourse just be driven by one political hot button issue. So let me stop with that.
Great. Ashok, you want to say something?
Yeah, on the last point that Andrew made, which and he said with this discussion, for all its brilliance and subtlety, for which we are very thankful at the center, it couldn't address that agriculture also has to be viewed in reference to what is called agricultural transformation in the literature, which is a macro issue. We cannot keep 65% of our population in agriculture. That is not the way to benefit farmers. And so I suggest that we get this group together again. Maybe early next fall. This has been a truly the best discussion I've heard so far on agriculture now in India, or agriculture in the future, where we also take note of the fact that no country in the world has been able to benefit its rural population by keeping them tied to the land or tied to agriculture. In light of agriculture transformation, how do we address the issue of farmer welfare and rural welfare? I think this is something we might, when we come back, I hope everyone will come back early in the fall, and we get together again and talk about that.
On that, I take that also as a criticism that the panel focused only on agriculture and not on manufacturing and services and structural transformation. I say mea culpa, Ashok, for not having done that. Let's make amends next year. But let me end by thanking, of course, all of you for joining us. To Ashu for being such a kind host for this, but above all to Shoumitro, Mekhala, Harish, Ashok, and Yogendra, you've taken valuable time away to be here. It's been very insightful. It's been very civil and respectful, and I think that maybe that's the message above all for our politics. That we can get better discussion if we actually do this, like all of you have done on the panel. That politics is obviously about ideology, but it's as much about a disposition and a temperament to kind of to listen and listen and listen and kind of this. So maybe that's the So I'm really grateful that you brought out that aspect, and it was such a civil, respectful, and conversational discussion. Thanks to all of you. Harish wants to have the last word.
Just to add to what Ashutosh was saying, the crisis in agriculture today is actually non-agriculture. Farmers kids not having any other options outside agriculture. And the second point, which I want to, which Arvind, you might find, the crisis today in agriculture is lack of demand. There is no income. I'm telling you all the things which Dr. Gulati talked about, chicken, milk, and all these grew on the back of rising incomes. So the problem today is there is no rising incomes. So there is no protein inflation. At one time we were talking of protein inflation. There's protein deflation. Right. So I think that is a crisis. So there's a macroeconomic crisis there. And so when agriculture is not doing, when non-agriculture is not doing well, it is bad for agriculture. Yeah. Thanks.
Good. Can I add just one thing, Arvind, before you close? For our audience, this video will be available on YouTube. All our panelists have agreed that this can be put on YouTube. And I'm very serious. I do hope you'll come back in the fall for another round of discussion led by Arvind. Arvind, you have the last word. And thank you, Grace, for my staff for handling this.
Yeah, and to everyone at Watson, Grace and others for organizing this, Stephanie for organizing this, and hope to regroup again where we discuss other issues as well. Thank you all very much. Have a nice day, night, evening, afternoon, whatever. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you for having us. Bye.